But welcome everybody. We see some familiar faces. Hi Ed, joining from Paris, the next door office. Thank you everybody for joining. Um, it's so wonderful to have you on a Saturday morning for us in Paris. I'm not sure where you're from, but we have moderators from Lebanon, Brazil, India, and so many other parts of the world. So it's really nice that all of you are here to talk about peace. Without any further ado, I'm going to give the mic and the stage to Elizabeth to get started.
Thank you, Mia. Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're from. And welcome to our session titled The Ripple Effect, Youth Driving Positive Peace Across Intersections. I'm seeing someone sending where they're from in the chat. So if you could as well tell us where you're from, that would be really great. And it's so great to see all of you today for the session. So we're saying a huge thank you for being here. My name is Elizabeth Chisorum, and I am a member of the Learning Planet Youth Council as a Peaceful Futures Ambassador. I'll let my supporting moderator introduce herself as well.
Hello, I'm Mia. I'm the person behind all the emails. I'm joining from Paris at the Learning Planet Institute. I work as a a community manager here, also doing a lot of communications. And I also work with Ilya and Ed in ways supporting peace. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I will also take this time to pass it on to our speakers. Veronica, would you like to go next?
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Veronica. I am Polish, but I'm connecting from Kosovo today. And I'm representing Youth Peace Ambassadors Network here as a youth worker, refugee worker, and peace builder. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to select another person to go?
Of course, Liana Liu.
Hi, it's great to be here with everyone today. I'm joining from the US, where I'm studying math and journalism. I am a Cypriot peace builder and peace activist, and I've been involved in the efforts to build the capacity of young Cypriots to participate actively in the track one of the peace negotiations in our island, Cyprus. And last year, I served as the youth delegate of Cyprus to the Council of Europe, particularly the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, where we presented Cypriot youth voices in the decision-making processes for local authorities. And I'm going to pass the floor to Felipe.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. It is a great opportunity to have this space to be able to discuss ideas with my fellow youth that are interested in peace studies and all related to peace. My name is Felipe Gobato Schreiber. I speak from Porto Alegre in Brazil. I am a non-binary person. You may refer to me by any pronouns. And I currently work as a consultant or an advisor to an international humanitarian law clinic of the Rio Grande do Sul Federal University. And as the research and policy coordinator for U4TPNW. So my background is mostly in international law, but it is a pleasure to be able to be here and show a little bit of how international law may serve and contribute to peace building efforts. Thank you. And I would like to throw the ball to Dennis once again. Thank you.
Chibe, everyone. That's my indigenous greeting. So I am Dennis Lalinzul Mar. I belong to the indigenous Mar community from Manipur. So I'm currently joining all from you from the northeast of India. So I am the founder of an initiative, an education and peace building initiative called the Bridge School Project, where we work with conflict-affected and displaced children, working mostly on building their life skills and socio-emotional learning, and along with it, peace building education. And then I'm also a youth participant for youth participants under the United Nations Office for Disarmament initiative called the Youth Leaders Funds for a World Without Nuclear Weapons. So that's all I am. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to pass the floor to Christelle.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me in today's very important event. And it's great to see participation from all around the world. I was just looking through the chat and I see it's truly a very global audience. So very excited for that. My name is Christelle. I am from Lebanon. I'm currently based in Lebanon. I work as a researcher with an independent public policy think tank here called the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies. Sorry, and we focus on public policies related to Lebanon and the wider MENA region. I'm also very passionate about disarmament, youth empowerment, the sustainable development goals, and these are themes and topics that I engage in relation to different organizations. I'm also a youth champion for disarmament, leader for tomorrow, leader to the future, and youth leader for a world without nuclear weapons with UNODA. And I love also facilitating intercultural dialogue among youth from different regions across the world. So very happy to be here, excited for the conversation, and I'll sit on to Abhishek.
Thank you, and hello everyone. My name is Abhishek Vyas. I represent the Cambridge Peace Education Research Group, where I work as a co-chair. I'm also a doctoral researcher in education at the Brunel University of London, and I focus on peace education as my main focus. One of the things that has really interested me about this gathering is how it is making peace and peace education more accessible, which is something that I'm truly interested in. So looking forward to a wonderful conversation. Uh, who is left?
Looks like we've got everybody
Can I
covered.
pass it on to?
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. Just as Abhishek was reflecting, it's really nice to see how all of you from different parts of the world have such a vibrant energy about peace. And that's very refreshing to see. And even though terrains, geography, economy, so many things keep us apart, just in spirit, we're so active about the same things. And without any delay, I am going to start with the questions. And my first question is to you, Felipe. As you were saying, how can adherence to rules of humanitarian law facilitate peace processes, especially in terms of disarmament and mitigating risk during conflicts? And could you share any insights on how youth can play a role in these areas? And why is it critical to prioritize their inclusion?
All right, that is a very interesting question with so many sides to it. Thank you so much for the question, Mia. Some of what I may share about international humanitarian law and its role in peace building is that because it's not something that is quite as intuitive, right? International humanitarian law refers to the law applicable in armed conflict. It usually refers to rules that regulate the way in which conflict is conducted. So what does this have to do with peace anyway? It presumes that peace has been broken already and regulates the ways in which people wage war. But there is a connection here that might not be so obvious at first, but international humanitarian law, by way of regulating the ways in which people use force, creates opportunities for cooperation, even in a moment in which all hopes of cooperation seems to be lost. It cultivates trust, and it also prevents or seeks to prevent atrocities that may serve to deepen the rift between two parties in a conflict. As an example, I think that giving you a tactile example may be the best way to paint a picture of this. And a great example that I can point out to is the civil war that has been occurring and reoccurring in Colombia for decades now. Some may say even that the war in Colombia dates back to at the early 19th century, honestly, it has been a conflict that has changed parties and sides many times. It continues to revolve around the same issues, even though the official date nowadays, people usually date it to the 1960s. But there was and it seemed to be a hopeless conflict that will never find any solution. But in 2011, there when a new government came into power after a long time of the government attempting to deny the existence of an armed conflict and trying to frame the rebel groups as terrorists and trying to deal with this issue through criminal law. Finally, this new government promoted a law on victims and land restitution, which recognized the existence of a non-international armed conflict in the country and framed and invoked international humanitarian law as a framework to deal with this. From that moment, from the recognition of an armed conflict and the recognition of the rebel groups as parties to an armed conflict, as combatants, we saw also a change in the will of the armed groups to actually participate in peace talks. The FARC, I'm trying to the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, they actually sent a letter to the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, expressing that they were committed to respecting international humanitarian principles aimed at protecting civilians. And thus, from that moment on, they were able to build trust with the government and sort of create a framework from which they were able to initiate peace talks that concluded with a pardon to many of the combatants that were involved in that war and their reintegration into Colombian politics. So that is one way, basically. It prevents also the committance of acts that may create more, let's say, grudge that people may hold on to and motivate the continuance of the conflict. There is a lot more that could be said, particularly in regards to disarmament. The concept of humanitarian disarmament is mounted on these principles. Like humanitarian law seeks to protect things such as civilian life, to prohibit this unnecessary suffering, even of combatants, to protect the environment, and basically things that people need to be alive. And this also ties into positive peace in a way. And humanitarian disarmament is all about, all right, some weapons seem to be incompatible with these principles. They are too destructive. So there is a lot to explore here. But I believe I have spoken for long enough already, and I wish to pass the floor to my colleagues. We can return to this topic later, but I believe it's more conducive for this panel to be carried out as a conversation. So you have the floor again. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe. And this is an open question to all the panelists, and also a statement. If you would really like to continue the conversation, don't hesitate to raise your hand. We are trying to make this as informal as possible. And thank you, Veronica. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it back to you.
You know, I don't know if it comes from studying humanitarian law and human rights law and being a practitioner in the field, but I tend to have a crisis when it comes to adherence to it and observing it all around the world. And I see the disproportion when it comes to applying the rules of humanitarian law. So on one hand side, of course, we need those rules. We need any framework that can protect the civilians, that can protect the communities. But at the same time, I feel like guardians or whatever of the countries that are supposed to guard the adherence to the humanitarian law aren't really efficient. And so while it should be a core rule that is applicable, at the same time, we could say, okay, but war is illegal. So it shouldn't be happening at all in this context. And the also atrocities that are happening all around the world when it comes to, I don't know, Ukraine, Palestine, or whatever we are observing these days, aren't really being applicable to the humanitarian law. So for me, while it would be crucial, and in the ideal world, we wouldn't even have to have those frameworks, I feel like more like than that I'm personally in a crisis when it comes to this. And I feel like I'm really believing in the civil society, and I believe in grassroots level movements that are trying to adhere to it, but it's super difficult to even apply on the field level. Thank you.
Go ahead, Crystal.
Thank you so much. Great points shared by Felipe and Veronica. For my part, just drawing on my background also in peace and conflict, and just reflecting on the context in Lebanon and the current ongoing conflicts in the region specifically. I think what I'd like to add also is, adherence to the rules of humanitarian law can facilitate peace processes, from the point that obviously, when you have conflict, there is a breakdown of trust, right, between the different parties that are involved in that conflict. So adhering to rules of humanitarian law can contribute to trying to rebuild that trust between the parties, and therefore, build towards positive peace, where you have genuine peace building happening, and not just a notion of peace where tensions still remain or linger underneath the surface. Can also facilitate disarmament, and build towards a step-by-step approach to a certain extent, whereby you are building towards again fostering more trust and disarming or disarmament that is linked to certain clauses or certain give and take from both parties. So that in turn contributes to reducing hostilities and limiting that cycle of escalation and violence, and can help with de-escalating the situation in a way that is more sustainable, and that allows to ensure some sort of justice and accountability to happen later on, which in turn also again facilitates humanitarian aid and relief in cases of conflict.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm going to pass the floor to Liana now. Liana, you mentioned that you are a peace builder in Cyprus, and you've seen divisions, whether it's political, cultural, or social, that affect peace building. And how can youth work across these divides to build positive peace? And how do you think decision-making processes can be better integrated to hear their voices?
Thank you so much for the floor, and thank you for the question. As you mentioned, I come from Cyprus, and coming from Cyprus, I've grown up seeing division everywhere on the island. Even walking down the streets in my city, Nicosia, which is the last divided capital in the world, in the buffer zone separating the two sides of the city, you have UN soldiers patrolling the buffer zone, and on either sides of the city, you have soldiers from enemy armies. So as a youth growing up in this condition, I've seen how it affects our prospects for a livable future, and even the belief of youth in peace. And for me, the most heartbreaking is that the Cyprus conflict has been going on for more than half a century, and in this time we've seen many negotiations come to fruition and then fail at the last moment or before even arriving at a conclusion. And this erodes the trust that youth and generations Cypriots have towards the peace process, to the point where most Cypriots now feel a kind of hostility towards the peace processes. And what made the most impression for me is that youth actually often in countries of conflict are the ones who feel the most resistant or the most hostile to peace processes, because we have never grown up in peace. And so these peace processes, which keep failing and failing, just erode our trust. And another key point I'd like to mention is that in Cyprus, we see that historically and systematically, youth and women have been excluded from the decision-making processes, meaning the tables where the actual negotiations for peace take place. And the absence is not just the fact that valuable voices are being lost from the conversation, but also the fact that we see that there is lack of accountability, because having voices such as youth, women, and civil society actively at the table means that there is a process of asking, why did this negotiation fail, and what can we do better next time, which at the moment does not exist. However, there is a very big difference between involving youth at any level and youth having the capacity to actually be involved in any kind of negotiations or peace processes and decision making. And for this, it's very important that we invest in peace education and capacity building of youth, because before youth can get involved in any kind of negotiations, any kind of decision making, youth first have to be able to let go of all the hate projecting narratives that we have been taught to hold our entire lives. And for this to happen, there has to be a lot of financial involvement, unfortunately. For example, in Cyprus, with the help of the European Union, we have scholarships that provide for youth to study abroad in peace education schools, with the hope that one day those youth would take it in their hands to build such a bicommunal school where youth from both sides can study in their country together. Another initiative that demonstrates this is ELCOI Cyprus, Local Conference of Youth Cyprus, which was an initiative that brings together hundreds of Cypriot youth from both sides across the island to write policy papers for environmental policy, which is a huge achievement given that politicians from both sides of the island refuse to collaborate on the environment. We often see that in countries such as Cyprus, the environment is one of the biggest victims, because in the process of all the conflicts, the environment is left behind, and the politicians say, oh, it's not important. And even the people lose faith in the environment or environmental efforts because they see the conflict as so much more important. So, in regards to building the capacity of youth to participate in peace decision making, it's important that we give youth opportunities at the grassroots level to participate to some capacity, and then being able to link those processes at the grassroots to the negotiation processes, the track one processes that often take place with stakeholders such as the United Nations, because without the support of international institutions and foreign institutions, often we see that youth feel helpless to participate in those processes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liana. Liana, you brought up something that's a very important part of the discussion, which is youth having the capacity to play a major role in peace building. And so next question is kind of like a riff off on it based on education, which is often seen as a cornerstone for peace. So Abhishek, this question is for you. While people say that education is important for peace, and especially in building the capacity of youth, access and quality still remain uneven in many parts of the world. So in your view, how can education systems be better designed to not only, teach them the knowledge, but also help them have the values and skills that are needed to build positive peace in their communities?
So I suppose there are a couple of ways of looking at it. One is that access to education contributes to peace. That is one strand of it, that when you have good education systems where there is, foundational numeracy and foundational literacy, that helps in peace building. Whereas the other aspect, which is peace education as a field in itself, looks at how you can have education about peace and education for peace. So, education about peace would mean what kind of knowledge, what kind of theoretical or philosophical or ideological aspects we are dealing with. For example, even when you talk about peace, the way Galtung talks about what is negative peace, which is the absence of, physical violence, as opposed to positive peace, which talks about access, like the existence of social justice. So I think peace education in itself is a very like an umbrella term, and it deals with a lot of knowledge based things and skills as well. So once you're talking about social justice or positive peace, what are the ways in which you can achieve that? So I think one of the things that I feel the youth can work towards is how do you make this education around peace not cliched, not something which is regurgitated in UN declarations and a lot of other political speeches over and over again, and how do you make it more effective? It's very sad that when you see two people fighting on the street, you want to see what's happening. There is an attractive pull of violence, whereas these kind of conversations around peace and nonviolence seem to be stereotypical, seem to be the same all the time, which sound good but mean nothing. So I think one of the challenges that a lot of us have who are working in this field is how can we make these conversations not limited to intellectual spaces and not in the realm of mahatmas and some gurus, but actually things which are applicable on a day-to-day basis. So I would love to hear from Dennis. He spoke about how these things are being applied in his context. So I would love to hear his views on how are you making it accessible? How are you making it more relevant?
Maybe I can jump in that. Abhishek, I think that's something which is really interesting that you have tried to kind of break down peace beyond your research, because I think peace is such a fancy thing, at many of the Western world. It's something because I am a conflict survivor myself, and I've survived a conflict like twice. Once when I was a small kid, and much more recently with the ethnic conflict that is happening in Manipur, which has been widely covered, where more than almost 1 million people were displaced. One third of children were also being impacted. So that's where my work comes really, really relevant for us in terms of what we do. So I think for me, when I look at peace education or peace building mechanism, especially in the society, especially also engaging youth, it's much more beyond books and making peace realistic. So very interesting concept that we have because I come from an indigenous community. So we in as a Mizo myself, we have this concept called Hlomngaina, which is a code of conduct where we taught ourselves to be kind, we taught ourselves to be unselfish, and we also keep our context. It's the community over oneself. So I think that's where dialogues happen. And for us, when we look at peace, it's not just the self, it's also the community. So how do you place that is something that we are doing in an everyday life, which is eminent in our cultural systems, which is eminent in our social justice systems, which is traditionally and customarily in practice. So one thing which is really important when Abhishek, you talked about where peace should go beyond research is that how do we actually instrumentalize peace education, which is applicable for children in terms of what they do in their everyday life. And that's where I later on I'll be sharing more on how we conceptualize this and how we make children their skills develop beyond foundational numeracy and literacy. Because I think like you say, the two concepts beyond, I think it's really important to look beyond that. And I think building that skills is something which we are currently doing in a place like Manipur. So I can share more on when my when my question comes into it. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for passing that floor to me.
Okay, thank you, Abhishek and Dennis. Okay, Liana has something to add, so please go ahead.
Yes, I'll be short, but I wanted to say, to add to what Abhishek and Dennis said, how do we make peace seem less stereotypical? It's very important to link it back to each person's own experience and to let them talk about how they have been affected by the absence of peace or how their family was affected. For example, in Cyprus, when we often bring teenagers from both sides together, and for most of them, it's the first time that they've even interacted with a peer from the other side, what we try to ask them is to talk more about their own identity, to talk more about who they are and so on, because at the end of the day, it always links back to the conflict in some way. For example, many of the children come from families of refugees, and by having each other talk to each other about how they've been affected by the conflict, you see building up empathy and understanding of the other person's story also matters so much. And because of that, people become being interested in peace, because before peace seems such an abstract concept, especially in countries where you've never had peace. And when you see the link peace to someone's own background and a peer's own background, then you see transforming the perspective.
Thank you so much, Liana. So Crystal's going to go next, and please, when you're done, pass it on to Felipe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I mean, great interventions and great discussion that we've got going here. I think just for me to add one thing, when the question was asked, what I reflected on is, kind of like my own understanding of, formal and non-formal education, right, related to peace. And I think for a lot of people, what they imagine, or what we all imagine, is, formal being like through schools or universities, non-formal, maybe we picture a workshop or a conference. So here, what I wanted to add is the innovation and creativity aspect to non-formal education, especially when it comes to peace education, right? So life stories, dialogues, but also, finding creative and innovative ways in which peace education can be expressed, right? So like theater, like role play, like collaborating on a joint project. So getting, the different parties in the conflict or the different stakeholders together to work jointly on something that seeks the betterment of the community. It can also be, music, it can be public speaking. So always kind of thinking outside of the box and finding innovative and creative ways for peace education to be expressed. Thank you. And Felipe, I'll just pass it on to you.
Thank you. I love that you mentioned role-playing, because I'm a big fan of role-playing games. And I've heard stories about people being brought together, like in the context of organized crime, playing games together and then realizing, oh, maybe we share some things in common, and eventually dropping out of the organized crime life and organized violence. That's something that I wanted to touch upon. Liana made an incredible point by mentioning that we need to envision what peace means in our context, what conflict means in our contexts. So Brazil, for instance, is a country that, formally speaking, we have been at peace for decades. We haven't been involved in armed conflicts as we usually understand them. However, we did emerge from military dictatorship just a few decades ago, in the 1980s. The period of dictatorship could be seen as a protected armed violence in itself. And aside from that, we also deal with very serious problems in conflicts involving organized crime, control for territories, militias created by people that should be protecting us, created by police and armed forces that exert pressure over communities and tax them. And I was reminded of the time in which I worked in the office of the public prosecutor here in Brazil. I worked with youth in context of violence, and they were at a time of a lot of conflict between organized crime groups here. We had two organized groups whose names don't really come into play here, but basically, they were the Bala na Cara and the Anti-Bala faction, or V7, and even within the youth facilities, wherein the youth offenders were sent to be interned for a time after having committed an offense against the law. Even in there, they had a tendency to sometimes maintain their sectarian divisions until, and that was very strange to me, because when I read into their profiles, every time I read through their files, they had basically the same lives. They had the same family issues, the same economic issues, the same things driving them into that kind of lifestyle. And the only difference in the end was in which neighborhood they were born in. It was simply, they were born like 1 kilometer apart from each other. And that's maybe they were just born in a different street. and that got them into contact with different gangs. And then they were swearing death threats against one another just because of that. So I think that is like one way seeing how conflict and peace applies within our contexts is very important, and trying to remove ourselves from some formal divisions that I think get more in the way. I wanted to allude to Veronica's former point that she felt disheartened by how IHL seems to apply. I think one of the issues I really just didn't want to hang on to that topic for too long, but I think one of the issues that we have is that we have had international humanitarian law for a long while. It has existed for over a century now in the form that we know it, but it has shared its space with other ideals, such as national and international security. And only now we are starting to change our perceptions or paradigms to those of human security, which are much more aligned with the values of humanitarian law. But because we didn't have that as a sort of conducting like a conductor to reality, to see IHL applied on the ground, we found it being curtailed over and over and cut short of being able to make change, even though it has made change in a lot of people's lives, such as through treaties and agreements banning certain kinds of weapons, such as landmines, which are absolutely devastating. Liana mentioned Cyprus, and I believe there are a few dozen locations, areas in Cyprus that are suspected of being affected by landmines and other explosives, as well as in many other countries. In India, I know that Dan is involved in work dealing with landmines as well. Has mentioned landmines to me as being an issue there. So the IHL has also helped in creating the sense like there are some necessities that we need to abide to, even when we get past that point of being able to resolve our disagreements in through words. Even during conflict, there are some things that are too precious and we need to protect. We need to protect our communities. We need to protect our livelihoods. We need to protect the environment. And some weapons cannot do this. Huge swaths of area are basically barred from civilians cannot enter there. Farmlands are made unusable. Natural environment is affected by the contamination of heavy metals in the ground from landmines. So there are some aspects in which humanitarian law has already changed lives for the better. But we need to hold on to these new concepts to be able to put them into practice and be more than just beautiful words on a piece of paper. I've talked enough. Thank you. Veronica, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation that we are having and the points that are being made. And honestly, I also feel like in our practice as Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, like our mission is to create a culture of peace for empowering youth through education, human rights education, etc. But I also feel like when I'm working with refugees, with people affected by conflict, and also, for example, here in Kosovo or with my colleagues from Cyprus, I hear a lot that, okay, peace has become this symbol, this slogan that is very often used for justification of military intervention, that is used as a sexy topic by politicians, let's say, to just bring a slogan to justify different actions that aren't necessarily peaceful or have nothing to do with it. This is why I appreciate Liana said that we really need to build an understanding of peace based on our local reality, based on our experiences. And this is why also I personally work with teachers and educators, teaching them also trauma-informed youth work, an approach that we are all shaped by our surroundings. We are all shaped by their families, our upbringing, our local reality. And very often, this is also what conditions us to create conflicts and to participate in a long-running conflicts. I see it also here when we are organizing exchanges between, for example, here that I'm in Kosovo with Kosovo Serbian and Kosovo Albanian community, that people are conditioned to see the enemy, not a person. And so peace education a lot for me is about seeing a human in the human, finding those consolidating factors such as, hey, we are young people, that we are having problem with unemployment, we are listening to the similar music, we are eating similar food, and just creation, those little things that can build the peace from the grassroots level. And I believe that even if we have conversation one-on-one and we create any kind of connection, it's already peace building. So yeah, I just wanted to add this little optimistic thought, let's say. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Yes, thank you all. This was a very wonderful top conversation because everyone spoke on this topic. So diverse insights on a singular topic. And from everything that I heard from everyone, especially something about Christelle, what she said on um formal and informal education, since we have you here already, Veronica, I wanted to know, you've worked extensively in human rights education and youth advocacy, and most importantly, utilizing trauma-informed approaches. So, could you share a story where such approaches have transformed the community or individual to kind of tell us how maybe a more informal type of education plays in creating rules, creating kind of conditions for positive peace?
Of course. Well, it's kind of what I started talking about creating an opportunity to meet, to have a meeting of young people, like in informal way, let's say, because we see a lot in different schools in different countries where we are being called by, for example, recently we had this situation in Germany that a school called us that, oh, Ukrainians aren't assimilating. And our question was like, okay, what do you mean Ukrainians aren't assimilating? What are you doing about this? Yes, we need you to come and talk to Ukrainians about the European values so they can assimilate. And our first question was like, how do you think this will solve any situation? And because we are really believing that, okay, we can have a conversation, we can have a meeting, but we need the whole group together. We need the very simple games and connections to actually build any conversation between each other, because there's no point in having the separate groups and just coming as this big white savior and saying, oh, yes, let's be peaceful, let's be friends, let's love each other, because that will bring nothing. So when it comes to trauma-informed youth work, of course, we are working with very fragile communities that are affected by PTSD, that are affected by war, that are coming from very difficult backgrounds, also when it comes to personal level, sexual violence, domestic violence. And so it's again about creation, the atmosphere of shared humanity, of creating some safe, I don't like the word safe space in this context, because for me, safety doesn't really, safe space is something that is really hard to achieve, especially in the context of people affected by war and people with PTSD. I'm suffering from PTSD myself, and I know that safety isn't necessarily a word that I connect with anything. And so I'm really for creation of brave spaces, a space where we can share our views, where we can be actively listened to, and we can just get to know each other better and see the human in a human. So when it comes to stories, there are many, but again, I'm based in Kosovo, and we, as Youth Peace Ambassadors Network, have been created youth peace camps here that are connecting young people from north of Kosovo, like Kosovo Serbian community, Kosovo Albanian community, and as well as different minorities, like, for example, the Roma and Ashkali communities. And we were just having cooking together, conversations together to see the consolidating factors, those things that affect us, but also to share our truths. How have we been conditioned by their, how they have been conditioned, of course, I'm Polish, by their upbringing, how they saw, how is everything shaping. As we have to remember that also when it comes to formal education, it is very often politicized, and the truth that we are talking about isn't necessarily everyone's truth. So it's also about sharing the experiences, seeing what we know, and learning human to human that, hey, I am here, I'm not going to threat you, I will listen to you and I want to be listened to. And this is like the basic grounding for peace building and creating something meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. You mentioned that seeing human into human, and as we all know, being human is very multifaceted. So, Christelle, as intersectionality is a very critical part of peace building, how do you find your way around and also address overlapping identities like race, gender, religion, and socioeconomic status when you're working towards peace?
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. As you mentioned, intersectionality is really crucial when working towards building positive peace. And I think our world today is becoming, more and more diverse by the day. Our workplaces are becoming more and more diverse. And as you rightfully mentioned, Lebanon itself, so my country, is also very diverse. And I think, a key word to intersectionality, is inclusion, right? So you want to ensure that everyone is included in intercultural and intergenerational initiatives and dialogue, because when you have these different identities and groups reflected in such processes or initiatives, then you have the society that's being reflected, right? And you are moving from negative peace to positive peace, because then you are really condensing and squeezing all of that diversity into a mutual space where people are actually building towards that shared understanding. And so in relation to that, it's very important to implement active listening and understanding of different people's realities. So circling back to what Liana said earlier about life stories and shared stories, and to what Veronica also mentioned about the need for people to understand each other, their realities, where they're coming from, and to kind of, see the humanity in each other. So this is, another human being. This helps break the cycle of othering or the cycle of divide, and helps build, again, towards that positive peace that we want. It also helps address or redress structural inequalities that may already exist, within the system, because throughout history, a lot of different individuals who have different identities have been excluded, which has, fostered a negative peace. So this is an attempt at redressing those structural inequalities, and it helps with collaboration and coalition building to ensure that everyone is able to work on meaningful projects together that move the present and the future of the country forward. And, this can apply not just to Lebanon, but you can substitute Lebanon with any other country, because I think youth everywhere are experiencing fatigue. Everyone is really skeptical about peace. There is a lack of inclusion everywhere. There is this desire to go beyond, tokenism, and ensure that any attempt at diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually meaningful, and that it does, reflect all of that diversity in the context that we're in, which leads me to say on the last point, tailored solutions, right? So it's great to take lessons learned from different contexts, but it's very important to be, context sensitive and culturally sensitive, and not to assume that, there's a one size fits all kind of attempt at bringing about positive peace. It really needs to be grounded and anchored in the context and developed as such to cater, to the diversity that is found, in this situation, within the country, but also within any other context that we might be part of. And I think, just reflecting on my own work, like a very, very small example, right? In our projects, whenever we have a project ongoing on any public policy, what we try to do is to ensure that we have that diversity of identities reflected, for example, in our roundtables or in our conferences. If we have a project on youth political participation, for instance, we make sure that youth are not only, attendees, but that they are also part of the panel, that they are, adding their inputs into like the final report, that this is actually being, translated, and that they do get some sort of access, to policymakers to ensure that the change that they're advocating for is heard. And, we continue kind of advocating for that and carrying their voices forward into it. Individually implemented, or if each organization kind of strives to implement something like that, then we can build that positive peace that we strive for piece by piece together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Felipe, will cue you in, and then after that, we'll ask Dennis his question.
Perfect. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but oh God, what was I going to say? I think this is incredible. Christelle made an incredible point talking about how peace needs to remain context relevant, right? And Veronica mentioned that we need to listen to people. I think that is, but it also carries some pitfalls as well. Because, all right, we finally got past that barrier that I mentioned with talking about security in terms of national and international security, because that is often very reducive. It reduces all of the populations of a territory and all of their concerns to one thing, basically, is the country safe? And whoever gets to decide what the country is and what the country means and what its priorities are often, well, it's the people in power in the government that might be affected by some interests. They might have been receiving money from certain lobbies that want to push certain narratives. And I think that is why it's important to really latch onto this concept of human security and also do not let its true meaning go. Because we are finally turning a little bit more towards who is on the ground level. To the individual and also to the communities that these individuals compose, right? And we need to make sure that human security keeps meaning to listen to their concerns, what makes them feel secure, and not to reduce human security to yet another dog whistle, not dog whistle, but just a buzzword that we can simply put on any resolution and said, oh, look how progressive we are. We're talking about human security. But also, by the way, human security means this, this, and this. And if you have that, that's all you need. Perfect. You're ready to go. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say, and also that we truly need to address tokenism, especially with young people, because I often see international organizations creating programs that are entitled, youth leadership on this and this and that, but also they're often, these programs, when you look at them, they're often just like courses that are supposed to teach young people how to do this and this and this. They don't often offer spaces for young people to actually be change makers still. And I think after people get their education, they already, like young people that want to participate in this, they do these courses and then they have like a handful of certificates saying I am a youth leader on this and this other topic, and on disarmament, on peace building, and on conflict resolution. Now what do I do with this? Because there are no opportunities in the job market in international organizations for me. All of them require 5 years of prior experience, and they offer no pay, by the way, or not enough pay that I can afford to live in the area that I need to be at. I've heard terrible stories about this, so this needs to be addressed. And people working in peace need to be paid enough, because if they don't get paid enough in these areas, the think tanks that want to promote the interests of the arms industry and others, they will pay them. And that drains a lot of, like, there is a massive drain of intellectual potential that goes towards this, just because those guys have the money to pay for it. So this needs to be addressed in the peace environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Christelle and Veronica, please, we'll ask Dennis his question. So in case we have any time left, we'll get back to you. You've all spoken about listening and really going back to being on the ground. This is something that has been reiterated from Liana, talking about grassroots efforts, Felipe talking about, tokenism and adultism, and Veronica also talking about people. So there's a very human-centric conversation going on. And Dennis, you've worked with the Bridge School Project, White Dot Solidarity Network, addressing systemic issues on the ground in Manipur. And so I was wondering if you could share with us how these grassroots efforts like this go beyond, just the end of violence and actually really go to addressing the root causes of conflict, and how you've seen the youth on the ground level really integrate their differences and their intersectionalities of identity into their peace outcomes or their hopeful peace outcomes.
Thank you for the question, Elizabeth. For me, I deal with children. Basically, I deal with very simple concepts. So I'm not gonna work to the halls of research for me or a higher level of policy. But every time I'm with children, I used to ask like, what is peace? What does it mean to you? Because for children, they don't understand the word even peace, because that is something which is so alien. So we need to take it towards a different aspect, and that's where how our programs are shaped. By the way, in India, we come from, all this diverse land, lots of things happening. It looks so beautiful from outside, but inside and on another aspects, we have this multifaceted aspects of conflict, violence. So even in our youth policy, the word peace is something which is only mentioned 7 times in a 100-page document. So that is where even the word peace is so alien in itself. And then we don't want to use the word conflict. The government doesn't, really welcome the word conflict. So they call it internal disturbances. So that's where for us, the dialogues on peace is something which is really, really, we need to shape in a way which is going to be understandable, where it can actually be action on the ground. So for children, I just want to contextualize it. For children, peace is something whenever I used to ask this, they say that for them, it is about having the possibility to dream and having the hope not to fear. So that is something which all the children would tell me. In all the 1,000 children that we have worked with, we have reached out, who are directly impacted by conflict, whose parents have lost life or who has been forcibly disappeared or whose parents has died in landmines too. So looking at the root causes for us, we are looking at about inequality in access to resources. That is where, for us, lots of these problems started having it emanates. And for children, when this inequality of access to resources are there are 2 things for them. Either they are angry or either they have the fear. So for this, one of the work that we have done is how do we democratize access? How do we democratize voices? How do we democratize learnings? That is something which inspired us to transform lives in the work that we have done. And that's where, most of our curriculums, our methodologies are very grounded. And when we talk about peace building education itself, that's where, very interesting conversations been going on. But for us, we don't want to really go on to the Western concept of peace education or talking about peace, because it's irrelevant for us, because we have our own ethnic divides, we have our own ethnic complexities. And again, with a larger Indian state, because we felt like second-class citizens, and that's what people feel, because there is social exclusion. And that's where for us, talking about education and intervening through education and peace building processes through peace building education is something which is so crucial for us. And working with children, that's where we try to create that positive space for them to think peace in aspects where they want to kind of shape the world how they want, because they are going to be the inheritors of the future. And what kind of world do we shape for them is something that we highly focused on. And that's where I would like to bring in 3 concepts that we have worked on. First of all, we work on this 3 Bs, very interesting concept where we work on bridging children, binding children, and bonding children. If we don't bridge, bind, and bond, whatever Veronica said on the human to human doesn't really manifested. And that's where we really work on the concept of kindness, because this kindness is something that we really want to kind of work as a value education, which would contribute to peace building. So we use, for me, peace building education is not something talking about high concepts about conflict education in the grassroots level. We used to talk about folk tales, because for us, folk tales is something which is really important, or folklores or folk stories. stories. So there is this one story that we used to have in folktale where Lindo Hai Unao, which is two brothers, two orphans, where they shared a single corn kernel. So that's where we teach about kindness and the importance of sharing, because we have the traditional concept of indigenous wisdom called Sem Sem Dum Dum Abil Titi, which means if you are kind, we'll survive together. If you are selfish, we'll die together. So it is based on this that we make these interactions possible for children, so that the fear they have can actually be reduced, and we can build their confidence. This is how we started doing our life skill education, because which is much more of an informal way. And then we also use the concept of the 4 eyes, where the first eye look on what I see as a child. What do I see? I see conflict. I see all this thing happening around. So I am angry, or I am sad, or I have the fear. So how do we look through the eyes of children? So we use art for that, what they see. So children cannot communicate at many points of time, so we use art to let us know what they see. And from there, that's where we bring in the concept of what we call communication, where I imagine. What do they imagine? It's a world that they might imagine. Maybe it's a better world. Maybe it's a world where they are presidents, where they are prime minister, or they are change makers. And then that's where we started doing this communication skills with them, where we used to let them feel or talk about their feelings. That's where we call I feel. So that in where they share their feelings, where they share their concerns, much more in a space which is safe for them. That's where we bring in these settings of their backgrounds. And at the end, in the last I, what we do is that I want. So what do they want as children? So what is the solution they want? What is something that they want to co-create? What is something that they want to shape in their community? That's where we used to bring this, and that's where as part of our dialogues, that's what we call the intergenerational dialogue with elders in the community, because many times young people and children, that tokenism, whatever Felipe was also talking, is something that it's happening in isolation. So we need to push those spaces. For us, pushing these spaces begins with community elders at the grassroots level. So we started, make this in children and young people to interact with community elders, including religious elders, to really make their voices, where the 4 eyes are actually from the role play to reality. That's where we bring in. And in that way, this is something that how we communicate and build their life skills, because this is something which we find it really important, or else if whatever piece we are talking is going to be something which is so elusive, it's going to be something which is so up there in the air, because this is something they can't see. Because when we do these practices at the grassroots level, that's where children started to really understand, what peace means for them practically. Because initially, all the drawings through the art also, they'll all draw about bombs and guns. But at the end, children started drawing about being a teacher. Young people started talking about, I am the president of India. And, then they give speeches. And I think it's a very interesting thing for us, because that's where we can really push towards a policy change, because our curriculum right now doesn't even talk about war, which is internally happening in India. For the past 30 years, there are so many ethnic conflicts that happen, or there are so many what we call the Naxalite histories, because there are all this conflict happening. But these are not taught in history books. These are not taught anywhere in any other spaces. So the state has been actually selectively teaching us what they want to know, and not teaching us what even communities towards social justice more particularly. And that's where we want to push for it through using indigenous systems such as folklore, storytelling, and this kind of life skill education such as communication, dialogue building, and decision making skills, because these are practically what we have experienced with young people and children, and we built this confidence. And now children are able to or young people are able to have their own spaces of interaction, much more of an intergenerational and intragenerational to kind of shape the community they are in. So right now, one very interesting thing that we are trying to do is that children who are in conflicting parties, they talk about how their friends are. They really miss their friends. So we work with children currently who lives in relief camp who are displaced. So we are currently working towards how children can write letters to each other. And we started doing on dialogue building, because all these are political influences. All these are influences by division. So children doesn't understand that, or young people doesn't understand it. But we try to build positive spaces in that way. And so for us, towards the end, what we are trying to really push is a policy change towards educational curriculums, more particularly having this kind of more of interactive spaces, and much more of spaces where they can just talk peace practically. So that's what we do, and we would continue to advocate for it. And that is what we currently do. And much more slowly we are working towards how children are, because we have children impacted by landmines who has also died more last year. So we are trying to work more towards that. And this is the kind of how we are trying to intermingle disarmament, peace building, peacemaking, and dialogue building on the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dennis. This was indeed a learning experience talking about intergenerational approaches to peace building, which I think has covered what everybody has been either directly or indirectly driving towards. So this last question is for everyone. So 1 to 2 minutes each, just to kind of like round up the session. Looking ahead, what specific changes or actions do you think are most necessary to ensure that, young people aren't just seen as contributors, but as essential architects or, co-creators of lasting peace? So we'll start with Abhishek and then work our way around. You just pass it on to whoever's next. Thank you.
I think one thing that has sort of emerged from this entire conversation is rooting peace within the lived experiences and the context of people, instead of having this preconceived notion of what is the right thing or what is peace, which has to be sort of imposed or has to be, imported. So I think the next step, or a sort of a continuous effort that needs to be made, is to understand that how do people, uh, you know, a lot of us here have not learned about these values or these things from books. We have, heard them from our grandmother, from the stories that we heard, from the movies that we have watched. So to understand what are those influences and building on that. So one of the principles of education is that you build from what you already know to a desirable knowledge. So that sort of constructivism has to be based in the lived experiences. And other thing which I mentioned initially is that how do we make it more attractive? How do we make this kind of work more attractive, more accessible? As Felipe said, that if there can be kind-hearted people, there can be well-meaning young people who want to do good things, but at the end of the day, they also need to fill their stomachs. So, how do you make it more lucrative to do this work instead of uh, the other destructive work that goes on? So I think, yeah, if I had to make two contributions, one is that how do we root uh, peace education, peace building into the lived experiences of people, and how do we make it more accessible, more attractive? I will now hand on to Veronica.
Thank you for passing floor to me. I think it's it's a difficult question, honestly, because on one hand side, we can do our best and continue doing our best, because unfortunately we are living in a world that peace building and peace education aren't really desirable. Like we can see, like with different repressions of activists, repressions of educators, closing different curriculums all around the world, that it's super hard, as well as what Felipe has said, like the funding and like also being overworked and level of burned out of activists and educators is also something super difficult. So moving forward, like I hope for changes in this context, because I also don't think like we should really work towards making it more attractive. It should be attractive already. It's about our future. It's about the future of peace. It's about the future of children, of of future generations that have the right and deserve to live in peace and deserve to live their dreams. So for me, it's more do your best and be hopeful that something will change and something will shift on the decision makers, or the people that we are working with us will really become future presidents of India or whatever country, and will introduce those curriculums that will change the world for better. And I'm passing the floor to Felipe.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Yeah, I suppose I already dipped into this. How can we make this more inclusive to young people? We need, as many of here have pointed out, we need peace education to start at a much younger age than we do. We only see peace education being talked about in universities at best in many environments. It's great that some of you are working directly in introducing this to young kids. There, some conversations don't need to wait. Like it's not a very delicate conversation to be talking like, hey, maybe you deserve to not suffer these terrible things in a war. And we need to work on how we build towards that. And also, what do you think about this, right? So we need to have a peace education that comes from a young age, that is inclusive, that listens to people's concerns. And like I mentioned, we need, of course, we need to keep having financial incentives. Like there is already a movement of creating these courses for preparing young people into this, but we need a follow-up as well. We need quotas of young people in delegations that are sent to these important conferences, such as conferences on disarmament, on peace building, on international security. We, for instance, in the last meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, to which my organization participated, we organized a joint use statement in which one of our recommendations was a quota of 20% young people in the delegations of parties that are being sent to the treaty conferences and to other spaces, as well as in the intersessional working groups of the treaty. And it will be amazing to see this actually happen. So create these opportunities, create quotas, like ensure that there will be room for young people, and give us entry jobs that are not impossible that are not exclusionary. Because if then only a very slim margin of people will be able to occupy those spaces, and that will make the conversations stagnant. And we need new ideas. Those will be my suggestions, my humble suggestions on how to include young people and how to build towards this new understanding of peace. I would like to toss the ball now to Liana.
Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the conversation so far. When we think about the question, why are youth seen as contributors and not architects, we have to think who gets to define whether youth are architects or contributors. And the reality is that it's the people who are in power, and it's also society, which means both the politicians in power and society do not recognize that youth have a major role to play that is critical to peace. So we have to think about, do we do our activism within a bubble of fellow activists, or do we actually reach out to society? Because I think often as activists, especially in countries of conflict, we are afraid to reach out because we are afraid of getting the bad reaction from the rest of society. So we might talk about peace within a very safe bubble. So I really identify with what Veronica said about we need to have spaces of bravery. And in regards to specific actions to take, I think there's two specific actions to focus on. The first is to create synergies at every level, local level, grassroots level, decision-making level, between different groups, for example, women and youth. We have, for example, at the UN, the Youth Peace Security Agenda and the Women Peace Security Agenda, which are separate agendas but are very interlinked to each other. So, for example, when we have youth groups or when we have women groups, we have to think about how can we collaborate, because we always bring up each other when marginalized voices, we collaborate. And the second is that on a global level, all of us have to feel an ownership over the successes of previous peace processes. For example, the Colombia peace process, that although it hasn't succeeded in containing and stopping the conflict, it, for one of the first times in history, it included youth and the victims to such a high level of decision making. And we have to celebrate the past successes because they open up more doors for everywhere else in the world and other peace processes. So let's not forget that our work is, of course, local, but it has global implications. Thank you. And I would like to pass the floor to Christo.
Thank you so much, Liana. I mean, great points that have been mentioned and made by everyone who has gone before me. I'd also like, to reflect back to the question like Liana did. So how can we ensure that young people are not only seen as contributors, but actually as essential architects of lasting peace? I have a couple of different thoughts really, but all center around going beyond tokenism, right? We talk a lot about youth inclusion, but more actions are needed. Talking about this is good. It gets the conversation going, but actions are what builds towards inclusion and builds towards lasting peace. We need youth to be educated, on how to build lasting peace, to be educated on conflict, to know that conflict is not synonymous with violence, because that's a big misconception, right? Conflict can be violent, it can be non-violent, but at its core, conflict is just another word. And we are the ones who have loaded it with meaning, with negative meaning in general, but it can also be very constructive in the sense of, airing out frustrations to build towards positive peace. Another idea is, something from my own work and advocacy is that we need to reconnect policymakers with their passion. So a lot of people who get into policymaking and decision making started that path or career because they had good intentions, because they had some sort of frustration, they wanted to make a change, and along the road or along the years, maybe that dimmed a little bit because they got stuck in that sort of bureaucratic or administrative process that made them lose their connection with people. So, when I see policymakers and decision makers in the same room with, different stakeholders, sometimes they're just really overjoyed to be able to establish that connection and to actually listen, to youth challenges and initiatives, for example, and, that could apply to other identities, not just youth. Because it kind of triggers a spark in them that, that was the reason behind why they started their own journey. And sometimes, just creating intentional spaces where you can foster those connections can lead to, starting a policy change, or can lead to effective policy change on the longer term, and can help break down systemic challenges. I will add, it's also important to open doors for youth and to build connections. So each one of us, knows someone or knows organizations. If you talk with a young person who you see is very passionate about the topic, start thinking in your own mind, who can I connect them to, or which organization can I connect them to? Like, how can I open up more opportunities for them to volunteer, to intern, to be mentored, to mentor someone else? Because I think, these small actions, again, can help build a present and future generation of youth who are conscious, who are motivated, who, have felt the change in themselves and want to kind of extend it to others. Also, building towards advocacy related to, government policymakers, decision makers, and encouraging the government and other organizations to put their money where their good intentions are, right? So don't just talk about, we need to empower youth, but actually, fund youth initiatives or platforms and, continue building dialogue that is multi-leveled, get youth connected to these policymakers, get youth connected to different youth from around the world or to other generations, and help them kind of understand each other's perspectives. And that's really what dialogue is at its heart, just aiding people to understand each other's perspectives, not to change them, but just to really understand where they're coming from. And I think this is really how, through such initiatives, we can build towards breaking systemic issues and we can build towards reaching more peace. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Dennis.
Yeah. Taking it forward from Christelle, thank you so much. I think I'm going to resonate the same. Coming from a grassroots organization, I think one very interesting thing is that grassroots organizations are the least boarded. I mean, the least funded. Because we might do very incredible work. We might have interesting innovations, interesting approach, but those approach doesn't actually comply with what we call the global standards. So for me, I have something called the global standards, because the global standard is not it's the one size fits models that global institutions would actually does it. And when we don't fit in that aspect, so normally funding opportunities are not available. So I think that is the constant struggle. But despite that, I think for us, we run through a voluntary mechanism, and that's what we are doing. But I think if we want to actually continue pioneering or designing sustainable peace or peace that are innovative, I think we would need to start paying attention and breaking down the walls of all these kind of aspects in terms of indicators that grassroots organizations might not have the capacity, but grassroots organizations have the capacity in terms of bringing very innovative ideas. And I think that needs to be being recognized, that cognizance need to happen. And again, the other wall that we need to break is the global north and the global south among youth organizations or interactions, because I think the global south opportunities for us coming from it, we have least opportunities. And I can share you an example. Much more recently, we were being denied a network in the peace building network because we just simply, it's just that our ideas or innovations are not enough. And then from similar countries, it already exists. So when we have limited spaces, or if we continue building walls on that, even between the global north and the global south youths, I think that discrimination, as long as it happens, we would not be able to have very interesting models around peace and how we can share ideas. So again, if we break that barrier, also there is always that kind of confidence that is not there, what the global north will expect us. So I think we would need to renegotiate on these terms and have this much more of a democratized access to funding, democratized access to opportunities, because if these are not happening, I think this scopes, whatever we have discussed, very incredible that ideas always have a limited scope. So I think very simple for me, my recommendation is let's break down the walls.
Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, I think that was all. Or was anyone left behind? Okay, yeah, that was everyone. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. This was really incredible. I honestly it was a learning experience even for me. And what I loved about this conversation was that it showed how much every single individual has the potential to become a peace builder themselves. And so you've all come up with like conversations and just mainly directions that reflect creativity, intersectionality, and even hope. And so it's really amazing. And you've taught us today that peace building isn't just about addressing conflicts, but also about creating thriving, resilient communities. So we will leave the floor open for any participants who have any questions for the speakers. Just you can raise your hand if you have anything to ask and or anything to say to any of the speakers, and that would be
But maybe we can also give a small heads up. Elizabeth and I were also participating in another event happening right now. So we will be leaving the floor to Ilya, our coworker, and such an amazing human being. But thank you again to all the speakers for everything that you shared. As Elizabeth was sharing again and again, it was an amazing learning opportunity. And a moment of pride for us working on this event. It really, all our work really shined through. Thank you so much. Ilya, the stage is yours.
Thank you, me and Elizabeth, in the first place for organizing this event. I think we'll let you go because you have many other thoughts to share, starting in 3 minutes. And question to any participants or any speakers. Do you have any questions to our wonderful speakers, our wonderful artisans of peace? Feel free to just unmute yourself. Richard, yeah, I've seen you made so many great comments and reflections. I think it would be really great if you could share.
Yes, I'm just trying to get rid of a screen that I have here. I've downloaded a new operating system and it's making me do all kinds of things I don't want to have to be doing. Yes, there is an awful lot going on that has been flying under the radar of a lot of people. And so I put hints of that in the chat, kind of overloaded it. I apologize for that, but there's just so much that's happening. This whole festival has been so stimulating. I'm a big fan of the Learning Planet Institute and the work being done there. I'd really like to invite you to attend as many of the events by the people. I put the links in there. You can see them. And there's a real effort to pull together what seem like two worlds. There's a whole world around what the Learning Planet Festival is doing, and then another whole world that seems to be largely disassociated, and we're looking for bringing them together. That's where we really start to empower ourselves and accelerate the changes that we need to see. So there's a new group that's formed up called the Rights-Centric Education Network. And it's not an organization. It's just people that believe that we need to bring education into alignment with human rights. And that by doing that, we'll be creating environments where young people flourish. If young people flourish, then gradually the whole population flourishes. And that's where we're coming from. So I mentioned in chat there that everything I've heard here today just adds to my sense of hope that there is this bubbling up of some real action that can address the problems that we're facing. So I thank all of you.
Thank you, Richard. We have time maybe for one question if somebody wants to ask.
Ilya, not a question,
Yeah.
but the kind of the key takeaways or the key things that we have recommended, will it be uploaded maybe in the site? Because so that our discussion doesn't fizzle away. So are there going to be aspects? Yeah.
That's what I wanted to mention in the wrap up. So as I see, there are no questions from anyone. But firstly, thank you and every one of you for not only joining the session, but for the work you do. Because I think that's just the cherry on the top of all 3 days that at Learning Planet Festival we talk about peace. Starting with 23rd on Thursday, there were in-person events in Paris. Yesterday we had UNESCO chair on peace and 2 other events showcasing practices. And this session is definitely cherry on the top for me, showing how many efforts, how many energy you put, and how many wonderful projects you have. And without you, it would not be possible. So thank you to every one of you for what you do in the first place. And secondly, for joining this session and sharing your thoughts, your ideas. I think for many of us who were here, I think it's a really great example how this session, which is 100% youth-led, fully organized by young leaders, no intervention, no guidelines, no need to say, oh, you have to do that. I think that I would just rephrase it, giving agency to youth. That's the result what happens if you give agency to great young leaders. So further I go, we have more than 200 people who registered for this event. We know it's online, so we assume people are not showing up sometimes. But this recording will be shared with everyone who registered, so with 200 people. Also, I wanted to highlight that in person here, even though we're not so many, but there were some great people we talked about research, but also I've seen a couple of advisory boards from LPI, some potential investors as well were appearing here and then, so founders and philanthropists. So I think it's also a good sign that these ideas, um, they interest many of the people. So whenever we'll take some time to to do post-production for the session, we will share with you, as all the speakers, with all the participants. We're gonna post it on the YouTube, on the channel of the Learn Paint Festival. And I wanted to suggest to all of you as speakers, maybe if you want something to share as a post-festival ideas, or you have some quotes, or you have some materials that you want to share, feel free, because we can do also an article regarding the session to put all your ideas. So I will let you be in touch with Mia and with Elizabeth. So thank you everyone for joining the session. Thanks to all the speakers. Wishing you a great Saturday, no matter what part of Saturday you are in the morning or in the late evening. I know we have very different time zones here. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
See you. Have a great Saturday.